Sarah Thompson's screams echoed through the quiet suburban street as paramedics rushed into her home, where her infant son, Noah, lay motionless in his crib. Yet what doctors would later pull from the baby's throat was not food, not a toy, but a horrifying secret that exposed a nightmare no one in the town could have imagined. On a quiet spring morning, the streets of a suburban neighborhood lay calm under the pale glow of the rising sun. Lawns were still wet with dew, sprinklers clicking in rhythmic cycles, and a faint smell of fresh-cut grass lingered in the air. Most of the town was just beginning to stir awake when the peace shattered with a frantic call to emergency services. A young mother, barely able to form words through her sobs, screamed into the phone that her infant had stopped breathing. The dispatcher instructed her to stay calm, guiding her through chest compressions, but her panic made every instruction feel impossible. Within minutes, the wail of sirens broke the morning silence as an ambulance and a police cruiser tore down the otherwise still street, screeching to a stop in front of the small brick home. Inside, the scene was chaos. A pale baby lay limp in a crib, his tiny chest still. Paramedics rushed in, lifting the infant swiftly, beginning CPR with mechanical precision. The young mother stood nearby, clutching her hands to her face, trembling, her cries muffled as neighbors peeked from porches and windows, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding. One medic, trained to clear the airway before inserting equipment, slipped a finger into the baby's mouth. Instead of the clear passage he expected, his touch met something unusual, firm, foreign, and lodged deep. He froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing with concern. Babies often choke on toys or food, but the obstruction he felt didn't match either. It wasn't soft or rounded like food, and it wasn't hard plastic like a toy. It felt deliberate. With delicate care, the medic attempted to extract the object, but it was embedded too deep to remove quickly. Seconds were ticking away, and the infant's skin was shifting from pale to dusky blue. They loaded the baby into the ambulance and sped off, the sirens screaming. Police officers stayed behind to manage the distraught mother and begin an incident report. At first, they thought it was a tragic accident, maybe a case of negligence, an infant swallowing something small left within reach. But the medic's uneasy description, overheard in rushed tones, hinted at something stranger. At the hospital, doctors immediately took over. A pediatric surgeon inserted slender tools down the baby's throat, carefully maneuvering until he grasped the obstruction. When it was pulled out, the staff expected to see a toy or perhaps even food. Instead, what lay in the metal clamp was something no one could have imagined, a tightly folded, damp piece of paper bound with thin tape. Nurses exchanged looks of disbelief, and one recoiled instinctively. A hush fell over the room, the gravity of what had just been discovered overwhelming them. The baby began to gasp faintly, air finally rushing into his lungs, his fragile body fighting for life. News of this strange discovery reached the officers who had responded to the scene, and what began as a routine medical emergency suddenly shifted into something far more sinister. The idea of a foreign object in a child's throat was disturbing enough, but the fact that it was paper deliberately folded and secured with tape suggested intent. Someone had placed it there. The room grew heavy with unease as the paper was set aside, still unopened, its secrets waiting to be revealed. For the police, the moment marked the start of a case unlike anything they had ever seen. What had begun as a desperate race to save a life was transforming into a mystery darker than any of them could have expected. Doctors and nurses gathered around the metal tray where the strange object had been placed. Under the bright fluorescent lights, the folded piece of paper looked harmless at first glance, but there was something unsettling about the way it had been tightly wrapped in layers of tape, as if meant to endure moisture and pressure. It was small enough to fit inside a baby's throat, yet designed with a kind of precision that made it impossible to mistake for an accident. One of the attending physicians carefully slit through the tape with surgical scissors. The damp paper peeled apart slowly, edges darkened from saliva, until the center was revealed. There, drawn in heavy black ink, was a symbol unlike anything the staff had seen before. It wasn't just a scribble. The lines were deliberate, intersecting circles and jagged edges, almost like an emblem or seal. The discovery left the room in stunned silence. The nurses whispered among themselves, their voices tight with unease. What kind of person would fold a paper like this and force it into an infant's airway? The attending doctor quickly called security and instructed staff to preserve the object. Police officers arrived at the hospital within the hour, their expressions growing grim as they examined the evidence bag. The folded paper was no child's toy. It was intentional, a message of some kind, and it had nearly killed the baby. The officers could see the fear on the faces of the medical team. These were professionals accustomed to emergencies, yet even they were shaken by the unnatural nature of the find. Investigators began asking questions immediately. How could such an object end up inside the child? Was this a case of parental neglect, abuse, or something else entirely? They spoke to the mother, who was still trembling in a waiting room chair. She insisted she had no idea how the paper had entered her child's mouth. She said she had been feeding him, stepped away briefly to grab a blanket, and returned to find him silent, his lips turning blue. The timeline was short, yet the consequences had nearly been fatal. Detectives took note of every detail she gave, but suspicion lingered. The deliberate folding of the paper, the strange symbol, and the tape suggested planning. It was no accident of carelessness. The object was sent to the police lab for further analysis. Specialists examined the ink, the fibers of the paper, and the adhesive. Early tests showed the ink had been drawn with an unusual blend, not a standard pen or marker. The paper itself seemed aged, not the kind typically found in a household notebook. As investigators documented the findings, they couldn't escape a growing sense of unease. It was as if the paper had been prepared for this exact purpose, a small message hidden in a child's body like a secret waiting to be delivered. Outside the hospital, rumors began to circulate. Word spread quickly in the small community that something bizarre had been found lodged in the baby's throat. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, whispering theories, their voices laced with fear. No one could comprehend how such a disturbing event could happen in their quiet town. For detectives, the mystery was only beginning. They now had a clue that pointed not toward an accident, but toward a carefully orchestrated act with chilling intent. Detectives arrived at the family's home later that evening, determined to search every inch for clues. The small brick house looked ordinary from the outside, with a neat front yard, a tricycle leaning against the porch, and curtains drawn tight across the windows. Inside, the air felt heavy, as though the walls themselves were holding secrets. The mother sat quietly in the kitchen, her eyes swollen from crying, while investigators moved carefully from room to room. Nothing about the living room or kitchen appeared unusual at first glance. Toys were scattered across the floor, half-folded laundry sat on the couch, and family photographs lined the mantel. But detectives knew to look deeper, beneath the surface of normal life where the unsettling often hides. The nursery became their main focus. It was painted a soft pastel, with stuffed animals lying neatly on shelves and a mobile dangling gently over the crib. At first, everything seemed in order. Then, one investigator noticed faint scuff marks on the floor near the dresser, as though the piece of furniture had been shifted recently. With effort, they pulled the dresser away from the wall. Behind it, concealed in a narrow gap, sat a small wooden box. Its surface was scratched, its latch simple but worn. When it was opened, what lay inside shocked even the seasoned officers. Dozens of folded papers, each bound in strips of tape, filled the box. Every one of them bore the same symbol that had been found in the infant's throat. The papers were stacked in deliberate rows, suggesting careful placement rather than careless hiding. Some had faint reddish stains that looked suspiciously like dried blood. The room grew quiet as the investigators examined the collection. Whoever had placed the object in the child's throat had done so before, practicing or preparing. This was no single act of cruelty, it was part of something larger. Each folded paper was preserved like a token, an artifact meant to hold meaning to its creator. Detectives photographed everything and secured the box for evidence. They questioned the mother again, asking if she had ever seen the symbols before or if she recognized the box. She denied it with shaking hands, insisting she had no knowledge of its existence. Her fear seemed genuine, but her words alone could not clear her from suspicion. The father was contacted next. He had been away on business, hundreds of miles from home, and expressed shock at what had been discovered. His alibi was solid, yet detectives could not dismiss the possibility of someone within the family being involved. Still, the presence of so many identical papers suggested an outside influence, something more organized than a troubled parent. As night fell, the box of papers weighed heavily on everyone involved. The baby remained in the hospital under close observation, his fragile body recovering slowly from the ordeal. Meanwhile, investigators left the home with a sense that they had uncovered only the first layer of a much deeper mystery. The hidden collection raised questions no one yet had answers for. Who had created the papers? Why were they concealed in the nursery? And how could something so chilling be lurking unnoticed in a place meant to be safe for a child? Forensic experts studied the wooden box and its contents with meticulous care. Under magnification, the symbols revealed precise strokes, not random scribbles. The ink was dense and heavy, made from a mixture uncommon in household pens. Some of the papers had faint impressions, as though written over softer surfaces, suggesting they had been produced in haste, possibly in secret. When investigators compared the symbols to existing criminal databases, they found a disturbing match. Months earlier, in a town just 30 miles away, police had responded to reports of missing children. At two of those crime scenes, folded papers marked with similar symbols were discovered. Those cases had never been solved, and now the same markings had surfaced again, this time lodged in a living infant's throat. Detectives went through records, trying to connect missing children with strange signs. Every case involved kids under 5. Families said odd things happened before the children disappeared. New toys that no one had bought, items moved around, or objects that didn't belong. At first, parents thought it was nothing, but once their children were gone, the signs felt terrifying. The new evidence showed that the group behind the crimes was becoming bolder. Instead of leaving symbols nearby, they were now hiding them inside the children. Police joined with other departments, forming a secret task force to look for more clues. Soon they found even more cases with the same design. One symbol was carved under a crib. Another was hidden in a stuffed animal after a toddler went missing. It became clear the markings were not accidents. They were signatures, proving the same group had been active for years without anyone noticing. Detectives spoke to the mother again, hoping for answers. She denied knowing anything, but admitted she had found strange little objects in her home weeks before, trinkets she didn't buy, toys her baby never owned. She thought they were gifts or mistakes, but now she realized they were warnings. The thought that her baby had been watched all along filled her with fear. Publicly, the police kept quiet, not wanting to cause panic. Behind closed doors, though, the case became their top priority. Experts studied the ink on the papers and found it came from underground printing circles. Historians said the symbols looked like old ritual markings linked to cults. The papers weren't just notes, they were part of a system with hidden meanings. What started as one family's tragedy soon spread across towns. The shift from missing kids to symbols hidden inside infants showed a frightening change. Whoever was behind it was more daring and better organized. The signs showed careful planning, a strong belief system, and crimes that went far beyond reason. Detectives realized they weren't chasing one person, they were fighting a network that moved in secret, showing themselves only when they wanted. The task force worked without rest, chasing every clue. After weeks, they discovered a building hidden in the countryside, disguised as a wellness retreat. Outside, it looked harmless: old wood walls, a painted sign for meditation classes, cars in a dirt lot. Inside, the air was heavy with incense. The walls were covered with the same strange symbols. Police stormed the place. Behind locked doors, they found notebooks filled with identical markings lined up like part of a code. Tables held strange ritual tools, bowls of melted wax, herbs tied with red strings, and worst of all, photos of children pinned to corkboards. Some were known missing kids, others had never been reported, proving the group had been watching families long before. Among the evidence were detailed records, written like diaries. Members had studied families, listing routines and weaknesses. They wrote about infants as vessels, describing how to hide papers inside their things. To the cult, babies were carriers of secret messages for their leader to read. The crime in the suburban home wasn't random, it was part of their system. The leader was soon named. He was once a spiritual teacher who ran healing workshops. Outsiders thought he was odd but harmless. In truth, he had built a circle of followers who believed in using children as innocent vessels. Police arrested him in the raid and found piles of folded papers in his room, each marked with the same symbol and ready for use. The discovery shocked the whole region. News outlets struggled to explain it without sounding unreal. Parents grew fearful, checking their kids' toys and cribs for anything unusual. Families of missing children were crushed but also relieved to finally know what happened. The truth, though, was worse than they could have imagined. In court, prosecutors showed the papers, photos, and diaries as clear proof. Jurors listened in silence as the story unfolded. The baby who had almost died became the one who exposed the cult's crimes. The tiny paper stuck in his throat became the key that broke open a network hiding in plain sight. The infant lived, scarred but alive, while police kept studying the writings, worried that more victims and secrets were still hidden in the countless papers left behind.